and now. Amazingly, it's managed to stand firm and avoid the rising tides of the river, and since an image was published in National Geographic, it's become a popular tourist attraction, with people traveling to the banks of the river just to see it with their own eyes. Number 14. Phuktal Monastery. Phuktal Monastery, which is in the Himalayan region of Lakta in India, is built around a cave network that was first used by monks more than 2,500 years ago, and is now the only monastery remaining in the country that can only be accessed by foot. The reason for this is clear, because the buildings are perched precariously on the cliffs of the mountain looking out over the Zanskar River, and it's at least a day's trek from the nearest town. It's currently the permanent home of around 70 monks and contains prayer rooms, a library, a temple, residential quarters, and the sacred cave behind. As a place for peaceful contemplation and prayer, there really is nowhere quite like it, and if its long history is anything to go by, it'll still be in use thousands of years from now. Number 13. Castellfollit de la Roca. The town of Castellfollit de la Roca has been lived in for more than 1,000 years in different guises, and you can see the history throughout, from the narrow medieval street to the fortifications from the Civil War. But this place in the northeast of Spain isn't your ordinary community, because the houses on either side of the central street are built on the edge of a cliff face with a 160-foot drop to the valley below. The outcrop it's built on is a volcanic formation, and the rock was used in the construction of most of the buildings. There were clear benefits for its location originally, because residents could see threats approaching from miles away, but now it stands as a remarkable place, with some of the best views from a house you'll see anywhere in the world, even though it seems unbelievable that the buildings have remained stable being so close to the edge. Number 12. The Glass House in Timber Cove. If you're living in a sunny climate near the ocean, you'll want as many windows as possible to get the greatest views. But the $3.9 million glass house in Timber Cove, California won't be to everyone's taste. Covering an area of 1,200 square feet, it has one bedroom and one bathroom, and is accessed by a long wooden walkway from the street. The small piece of rock that it's built on means that the property is, according to the realtors, beyond oceanfront, and simply ocean, and it's hard to disagree. The use of glass walls means that you look out and all you see is the Pacific with no sense of land whatsoever, making it one of the most luxurious and potentially dangerous homes in the world. Number 11. Solvay Hut. Mountaineers face all sorts of dangers when trying to scale the world's most challenging peaks. In order to provide a refuge for those climbing the Matterhorn in the Alps, the Swiss Alpine Club built several huts along the way, but the most treacherous of them all is known as the Solvay Hut. Built in just 5 days in 1915, it's at an altitude of 13,000 feet and terrifyingly sits right on the edge of a sheer drop. Inside there are 10 beds and a phone to call for assistance, but even navigating to the front door is dangerous enough. This is undoubtedly one of the most extreme places in the world you could ever stay the night, and it's no surprise that nobody spends any significant amount of time there. Number 10. The Hanging Temple. The Hanging Temple of Hengshan is in the Jiangxi province of China and seems to defy gravity by being built along the cliff face of the Hengshan Mountains. The structure contains 40 rooms that are connected by a network of passageways, and it's dedicated to 3 religions: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. According to legend, the first structure here was built in the 5th century by a monk called Yao Ran and was used for hundreds of years before falling into a state of disrepair. To give the foundations for the buildings to stand on, holes were drilled into the cliffside and poles were inserted to provide a stable base. In 1900, the site was renovated to look how it does today, and with 78 stunning statues and carvings throughout the venue, it's the permanent residence for almost 100 monks and draws tourists from all around the region who can't quite believe it's real until they see it with their own eyes. Number 9. Nestin Box. With space for construction becoming limited in some areas, architects are continuously coming up with new ideas how to turn seemingly uninhabitable areas into places full of prime real estate. One of the most radical ideas has been put forward by a Swedish company called Homecrux, who found a way to hang wooden houses on the side of cliff faces by drilling sturdy steel pylons into the rock. The result is what they call Nestin Box, a 3-story abode that offers residents more than 530 square feet of living space, which they say is more than enough for 1 or 2 people. The entrance is in the back of the structure, which is accessed by a walkway from the top of the cliff, and they contain everything you'd expect, including a kitchen, dining area, bathroom, an office, and 2 bedrooms. The company behind the concept hopes this will be the way we live in the future, although there are plenty of others who aren't quite convinced. Before we move on, be sure to subscribe to Top 5s with notifications on. Number 8. Hanging Houses of Cuenca. The Spanish town of Cuenca was a bustling hive of activity between the 15th and 18th centuries, but as the town grew, residents became restricted by the lack of space on the hilltop where it had been built. There were only two options. The buildings became taller, and some were constructed hanging over the edge of the cliff. They were a feat of engineering, and amazingly, some of these hanging houses were as much as 8 stories tall, while hanging over a several hundred-foot drop to the valley floor below. They used to be a defining feature of the town, but as they aged, it became very clear that there were severe safety concerns about them, and today only one remains. Called La Casas Colgadas, which literally means the hanging house, it has been kept as a tribute to the history of the place, and this is where the Cuenca Museum is located, as well as a restaurant for those who want to eat on the edge of the earth. Number 7. The chemosphere. California is a hotbed of modern design techniques, but one of the most surprising and potentially dangerous homes is known as the chemosphere. It was built in 1960 by John Lautner and was once described as being the most modern home built in the world by the Encyclopedia Britannica. Built in an octagonal shape, it's 1 story tall with around 2,200 square feet of living space. But the real challenge with the home was that it was placed on the plot of land that has a 45-degree incline. Rather than trying to fit it to the ground, the decision was made to build it atop a 30-foot tall concrete pole. The only way to access the property is by a custom-built funicular railway, and it's a testament to the designer that the house is still standing. The use of a 20-foot wide concrete pedestal that's buried beneath the ground to give it a solid foundation has enabled the structure to survive earthquakes and torrential storms. But even knowing this to be the case, you'd still be anxious anytime something happens, just in case the foundations finally gave way. Number 6. Redcliffe Road. Torquay is a town on the Devon coast in England, and while it's a firm favorite for people looking to find their ideal beachfront property, things here are far more precarious than it might seem at first. Redcliffe Road is a particular danger, with houses that were built around 90 years ago. At the time, there was plenty of distance between them and the edge of the cliff. But thanks to decades of coastal erosion, they're now right on the edge. In 2013, this became starkly clear to residents when a series of rock slides saw one house completely fall over the edge, and the people living on the others were forced to evacuate just in case they suffered the same fate by falling 150 feet into the ocean below. One property called Ridgemont House saw the brunt of the problems, and amazingly, the owner had never been able to set foot in the place. She had purchased it over the phone in a blind auction for around $250,000. But within a week of the sale being finalized, the house was declared unsafe. It's a good job too, because just 2 years later it was wrecked and would have almost certainly been a fatal accident if anyone was inside at the time. Number 5. The Korowai Treehouses. The Korowai people live in Papua, Indonesia, and as a community that remains virtually separated from the outside world, they retain many of the traditions that have been handed down to them by the ancestors over centuries. They were in fact completely isolated until the 1970s, and since then have welcomed limited interaction from visitors who want to learn about their way of life. There are 2 particularly surprising things about the Korowai. The first is that they are the last known cannibalistic tribe in the world, and the second is that they live in treehouses that, in some cases, can be up to 114 above the jungle floor. The reason for this is that at this height they aren't bothered by insects like mosquitoes, and they also believe that it protects them from evil spirits. The houses are usually built around either a banyan or a wambam tree for support, and additional poles are added to the corners of the house to hold it firmly in place. The floors are constructed first, and when this platform is ready, it's a fairly simple task to add the walls and roof. Once complete, the homes are blessed with animal fat and would be expected to last for about 5 years before needing to be replaced. Number 4. Nugget Point Lighthouse. In the days before GPS and radio communication like we have now, ships found themselves at great risk of running aground on rocky outcrops close to the coast, so lighthouses were built to warn them to stay away. A permanent resident was needed to ensure the light was constant, but this often meant that they were required to live in some of the most remote and inhospitable regions of the world. Possibly the most dangerous and extreme lighthouse of all is at Nugget Point on the South Island of New Zealand. Built in the mid-19th century, it was originally powered by an oil burner, but has now been fully modernized so it functions autonomously. Its position was chosen to warn sailors of the Nuggets, a series of rocky islets that only just breached the water's surface, and that had been responsible for a number of wrecks in the years leading up to its construction. To ensure the light beam could reach as far as possible, the lighthouse was built on the very top of the largest of the nuggets, with an almost sheer drop on all sides apart from behind where there's a steep path leading to the mainland. The combination of its remote location along with the extreme weather seen in this part of the world makes this undoubtedly one of the most dangerous places to live on the edge of the earth. Number 3. Liechtenstein Castle. Most of us have at some point dreamt of living in a castle, but how far would you go to make that a reality? While the Liechtenstein Castle in the German state of Baden-Württemberg may look nice at first, its location certainly comes at a cost. The current structure was built in 1842, although the remains of previous castles can still be seen in the grounds. The astonishing thing is that its perimeter wall is right up against the edge of a cliff, giving spectacular views out across the village of Honau, but also providing a serious level of danger should the structural integrity of the hilltop ever be compromised. There was one occasion when this nearly happened during the Second World War when an American tank was passing through the valley below. It took its aim and fired a shell at the castle, but for some reason, it didn't explode. If it had done, it would have almost certainly obliterated the structure, but all it actually did was puncture a hole in the plaster, which can still be seen today. Number 2. Meteora. Greece is home to some of the most unique geography in the world, and with such a rich cultural history, some of these features have long been used as places of refuge for those escaping wars, or those wanting to worship. The Meteora is a region in the center of the country that's covered in huge naturally formed pillars and giant boulders that the ancient Greeks were convinced was a playground of the gods. There's evidence that humans have lived in the region for at least 50,000 years, with the earliest known structures dating back to 23,000 years ago. But the reason it's so renowned now is because of a series of monasteries that were built precariously on the top of some of the pillars. Originally there were 24, but now only 6 remain. The only way to access them is via a network of staircases that have been carved into the cliff faces. And there are approximately 56 residents across them all, with 15 monks in 4 of the monasteries, and 41 nuns in the other 2. They were built in the 14th century as a way to allow the monks to evade the threat of Turkish raiders in the region, and so they purposely made these structures as inaccessible as possible. The staircases were only added in the 1920s, and before that you could only get to the top of the pillars by a series of ladders and a literal leap of faith to a rope swing which could apparently only be replaced when it broke. The Varlam Monastery, which still stands today, is 1,224 feet high up on a cliff. So, to aid pilgrims and the delivery of supplies, they would hoist people and provisions up with a series of ropes and baskets. Needless to say, if there was any sense of danger, they would bring up the ropes and ladders, and there was virtually no way for the raiders to reach them. This unfortunately didn't help in the later years, because during the Second World War the site was repeatedly bombed under suspicion of harboring leaders of enemy forces, and a countless number of artworks were stolen. The Meteora have become a popular tourist attraction in recent years for those wanting to learn about the Eastern Orthodox Church and the fascinating history of the place. The buildings also offer a spectacular view of the surrounding countryside, where it really becomes clear how unusual a region it is, and why the ancient Greeks believed there to be something mystical about it. Despite the attention, life in the monasteries remains fairly basic, because all the supplies need to be carried by hand up the winding staircases. This still provides the perfect conditions for the nuns and monks to carry out their duties, though, just like their predecessors before them, and hopefully those who will succeed them for many more generations to come. Number 1. Bonifacio. Bonifacio is a small town on the southern tip of the French island of Corsica. But just like on most of the Mediterranean islands, planners soon found themselves with a lack of space to build. It's long been lived on, too, and regarded as an important strategic position to the Romans who could oversee shipping activity in the sea. But today, some residents have a far clearer view of this than others, because there are a series of buildings that are right up against the cliff's edge. There's no doubt that this is a beautiful place to visit, but you'd have to be brave to spend your life living with that view and needing to walk along cliffside paths and staircases to be able to reach your home. It's definitely not for everyone. Subscribe to Top 5s for more and check out some of our other popular videos.